My name is Hadley Ogletree, and along with Alana Nafsagar, I am the graduate student coordinator for the speaker series in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning. Thanks so much, guys, for being here. We're so excited to have you. The mission of the speaker series is to engage with leaders in the allied design professions. We are so proud of our students, faculty, and facilities, and wish to demonstrate our hospitality to our guest speakers, for whom we are grateful. These talks are recorded for posterity, for use in studios, and for the greater community. We ask you to be engaged during these talks, to listen, to quietly take notes, avoid digital distraction, and stay for the entire 1 hour duration. A short Q&A will follow the talk, after which you can scan the QR code for attendance, and then we'll meet in the common studio for a follow-up reception with some refreshments. As a land-grant institution, we would like to acknowledge that the Utah State University campuses and centers reside and operate on the territories of the 8 tribes of Utah. The Logan campus is situated in the Sahivagoi, or Willow Valley, the ancestral lands of the northwestern band of the Shoshone Nation, where the Shoshone people have stewarded the land since time immemorial. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. I'm now going to pass it off to Professor Ben George to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Hadley. All right, so I do have some notes here. This is always kind of awkward to be like, hey, come up and talk about, somebody that you admire, you're friends with, and everything like that. And I'm not going to just rehash the bio there. You can go and look at it. But a little bit about Simon. Simon and I, we just were figuring it out, met in 2011 at a conference at the University of Illinois, the Landscape Educators in Landscape Architecture Conference. And we've really been friends ever since. We've collaborated together. Simon has come out here to visit us before. He was gracious enough to have me out to the University of Hawaii to present as well, which I'm eternally grateful for and ever will be. So, and when we were trying to find people that we could have come and come stay with us at the LAP house and contribute in the department. I was quick to reach out to Simon and to find out if he would be interested. I think he's one of the most perfect fits really for us here, and hopefully you guys have had the opportunity to interact with him. So Simon is probably one of the most well-read people that I've ever met. He's able to talk insightfully on almost any subject that I bring up. And I've tried a lot as we've been riding the ski lifts up at Beaver, which he's also a very capable skier. Don't be deceived. He grew up in the Northwest. Sorry, not the Northwest, the Northeast. The other side of the country. Went to the University of Massachusetts for his undergrad, and then subsequently got his master's degree at Harvard. So Simon eventually went on to work with AECOM in Australia, where he worked on a lot of projects, but one being an AIA, ASLA, I forget the technical term, but joint collaborative award-winning project in Seoul, Korea. And then subsequently went on and was a professor at Ball State University. He now is an associate professor at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. As I'm sure you'll see today, he's an engaging and articulate presenter. He's a very able and capable teacher. He was awarded the Teacher of the Year award from SELA. He's beloved and respected by his students and by his colleagues as well. And finally, as I mentioned, Simon is at the University of Hawaii. He's kind of, I think, exudes that island life mentality. He kind of helps me to calm down. He's like, it's okay. We're just going to roll with everything. Yeah, it's fantastic to have him around. He's one of the most empathetic and gracious people that I know, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you guys Simon Bussiere.
What a pleasure it is to be here with you guys. Thanks for coming out. I know you're required, most of you, to be here, so make sure you click that attendance QR code. Where do we begin? Okay, can this, Finn, is that good? Thumbs up? Hey, all right. Now I'm on a Mac, what is this, a Windows-based thing? Okay, we'll get this together. Let me get off of that ego trip there. All right. It's a pleasure, really. It's really an honor. Thanks for almost making me cry, Ben. That was too much. Ben, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Ben. He's very persistent, and also Sean Michael. I really need to give a shout out to Sean, Dr. Michael, for I think you planted the seed for this whole idea back. I don't know when it was, but it was in Selah in a hallway somewhere. And you said, hey man, we got this house, we just got this fixed up, you ought to check us out on when you take a sabbatical. And there's a lesson in there that it might happen right away, but just keep trying and certain things line up. So thank you to everybody else also in the background. Alana was doing a lot of stuff, your sister, Gaia, and Marianne, everybody in the department, really just for making me feel welcome in my little family. It's been just, at the risk of being sincere for a moment, it's been very, very nice. And it's a total pleasure. So let's get started here. Maybe I should thank the students as well, even if though you're required for attendance purposes. This talk is for you. I put this together just for you guys, thinking as if I were a first or second year student, what's the kind of crap I would want to hear someone talk about? And I'd like to get quickly through some theory and get into some design work and give you some sense of the types of outcomes that I think are possible. But the name of this talk here, you got to read your title when you start these things. The name of this is How to Frame Your Dragon, a concept in 5 parts, with some apologies to DreamWorks Animation and to the author initially of, her name is Cressida Cowell, who initially coined this term. So get ready for the highlight of the talk. It's all going to be downhill after this. Dun, dun.
Today you will learn to fight dragons.
Pain. Love it.
Let's get started!
You should come by sometime to work out. You look like you work out. I guess it's just you and me, huh?
No, just you.
Focus, Hiccup!
Can I transfer to the class with the cool Vikings? Whoa. Has anyone ever tried to train a dragon?
No one's ever lived to tell the tale.
It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. Let's see if this works. We're gonna take this nice and slow. Come on, buddy. Come on, buddy. Whoa! Yeah!
Get down!
It's okay. You just scared him.
I scared him?
Everything we know about them is wrong. Let me show you.
Either we finish them.
All right, any questions? So what did we learn? Yeah, right? The movie actually offers a pretty decent framework for us. And that was just the trailer. Imagine watching there's a full-length feature, like new one. Bryson and I were just rapping about. It's gonna be pretty great. How many of you have seen the original movie? Okay, good. I figured I'd read the room. Okay. So what if we just switch a couple of words around? Yeah, first to take care of your health. You're gonna need it. Learn how to focus. It's a superpower. Take your time and find out what works for you. And also, be critical of orthodoxy. Questioning the rules that have been inherited. Good practice. And you get to find that sort of truth out there for yourself. That's not bad, right? That's actually pretty good. Well, I really could stop there and just kind of rush into the practice stuff. But I think it's helpful in these occasions to maybe give some background and talk a little bit about the so what behind some of this stuff. So let's talk about design concepts and how they work in landscape architecture, how they happen, where they come from, and so on. We'll define the word concept and explore its meaning, and then I'll offer some suggestions for how you might put a good one together. I'll also hopefully get to this quicker, sooner than later, but I'd like to reflect on how a few projects of mine got started and how a few insights came to pass along the way. So first, let's start with this cool word. You've been saying this over and over. What's a concept? Well, for clarity, let's do a little bit. Is Chris here? We'll do a little bit of Latin. We'll split this into two parts. Yeah, con, which we know means with, or thoroughly in Latin. It appears in several English words: connect, convey, construct, conclude, conceive, contrived, concatenate, convey, consensus. The root sept, the second half of the word, means taken. It means sort of, it gives rise to numerous other useful words, including accept or accept, intercept, as well as deception. And so you can consider what happens when you have accepted something as a helpful way to remember the underlying meaning of the word concept. You've taken in something closer to yourself. So concept then is about taking in something novel, presumably. Doesn't always have to be new, but it's about perceiving it within one's given situation or context, ideally with the aim of gaining understanding. Okay, so what's the difference between an idea and a concept? And it's worth comparing the two, I think, at least at some point in the talk here, so we can look for some primary contrasts. An idea is a rough mental impression, typically. It could be a thought, it could be a suggestion or an opinion or a belief, and maybe even just an intention. A concept, on the other hand, grows more often from an understanding drawn from a particular set of facts or logics. A concept often entails filtering through established procedure. Some emphasis on the solid foundations of scientific tradition in the pursuit of knowledge. It's also useful to reframe these two columns and think about ideas maybe as dreams and concepts as the central aim and axiom of our working process. Dreams can be emotional and imaginative, while working emphasizes analysis and logic. Dreaming is personal and subjective, while working in this sense is meant to be objective, at least have the appearance of objectivity. And it's often more systematic, and typically it's replicable as well. Others can then follow your steps and that kind of thing. We can keep going there, but taken together, both dreaming and working, and sort of like dreaming, let's say, in the application of academic and professional practice models, can aid in the production of design concepts in very different ways, with dreams offering more imaginative and personal perspectives, and with working providing a more structured and informed approach. And by combining the two, and also adding to that, consciously and intentionally, designers, I would argue, can consistently work out effective design concepts that are both creative and well-informed. So as landscape architects, where do our concepts come from exactly? Well, it depends, of course. Nobody is going to approach a concept from every possible angle all at once or same direction. When it comes to starting out, we have to be selective, we have to be deliberate and focused, and do all that despite the temptation from the infinite amount of distractions out there. But really, you can start anywhere, and I'll talk more about that as we go. So actually, another way to ask the question is, where do we place our attention, and how do we react to the information we have? Another way to maybe think of that is, what lenses or sensors and instruments can we deploy to get deeper, richer data and better insight? So I'm going to ask for a show of hands, so get ready for that. By a show of hands, how many of you would say your concepts are more likely to spring from necessity toward a solution to a specific problem? Design, or your design process, becomes the tool to solve a problem you've identified. Problem solvers, let's go. Excellent. Yeah, me too. How about the artists among us? Any softies in here? Your concepts come from here. They come from inside, right? They're more inductive or abductive. This is where the abductive part of you is. It's your gut. You ever had a gut feeling? That's a real thing too. So how about the artists whose concepts tend to emerge instead from a predominantly abductive or gut reflection or reaction to internal stimuli? Hey, Alex, hi. Hey, buddy. Couple of us, good. Yeah, good, that's important. So this is a more personal source of insight or inspiration that sparks and it ripples out from you. This is pretty cool. Now this one, we all love this one. How about a systematic process of deductive reasoning toward generalizable information? Dr. Michael, anybody? Yeah, Dr. George. Good, we got one in the back row too. Got a couple of doctors in the works. Come on, we all love this one. Well, I would guess among us in this room there isn't a simple answer any one of us would want to give to describe how our concepts are forming, or like where they come from, their origins. There's so many other factors to consider in how we shape and share our ideas. Each project also demands a different set of concerns and requires that we address the verisimilitude of a given situation and problem field. I'll say big fancy words, but I define them if you want to learn some new words. And I would just say, you know, there might be some of us whose concepts have formed enigmatically, maybe even miraculously, let's say. But I would guess the majority of us have toiled and struggled more, having to embody real creative persistence, despite repeated failure and external resistance to our core principles and curiosities. Isn't it frustrating, Alex? No one's listening. You know, they don't get us. You know, that's tough. But it's a yes and situation. It's a lot like improv. I'm going to show some nice graphics here from Stephanie Harrison at UPenn as I read through some excerpts from the book that I'll show you in a minute. Concepts don't spring from a single narrative. They often come from synthetic combinations of dozen or maybe hundreds of references. Ideas can spring into being with the speed of bold and limitless imagination. They can also come on slowly in fits and spurts over periods of reflection and contemplation. They can form quite suddenly or through intellectual strain and dedicated rigorous experimentation and study. Pay close attention to the milestones along the way, which are often represented by moments of uncertainty. We can call those leaps of faith. Rather than seeing these as an impasse or as a big wall in front of you, instead, each can be treated as a chance to gain real critical insight. How you navigate through the process is what's important. And remember, it's your process. More theory here. According to Leanne Gabora, a psychologist at the University of British Columbia, it is widely assumed that the process of initial conceptualization involves what she says is searching through memory and selecting among a set of predefined candidate ideas. So these are like little ideas that are just kind of hovering around all the time. For her and for many creatives alike, the process is inherently heuristic. An approach, in other words, to problem solving or to self-discovery that navigates through somewhat practical but less than optimal methods or techniques. Carl Jung's dream theory offers additional descriptive foundations for us here. He argues that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Jung says that who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. As a quick aside, Jung, and if you haven't read any Jung, I highly recommend that you do, and I can give recommendations on readings as we go. Jung believed that our true self was revealed in our dreams. The facade, the stuff we wear into the world is less a real reflection than an instinct to camouflage, to be safe, to be sort of less likely to be preyed upon. And I think that's interesting and actually concerning, considering how we're all essentially living as digital avatars now. And I mean, how many of us are at least potentially integrated with some form of AGI? Where does our identity go when we become cyborgs? Alan Watts also said, he once very famously said that muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. I think that actually helps simplify things a bit. So in effect, when we conceptualize, we're recalling aspects of our own lived experiences, feelings and emotions brought on by environmental cues, and transmitting the character of those memories into new representational adaptations. In the absence of sufficient core memory, however, or lived experience, many rightly argue that new ideas also require the injection of external influence. That's why we're all in a beautiful place like this, together. You know, there's this saying, no input, no output. Once a line of inquiry is set out, multiple trajectories become apparent and divergent thinking tends to find its way into the process. All this becomes clearer the more one can focus and tune out distractions. Insight follows as you're able to shift perspective, considering an issue from multiple and often dissimilar points of view. The Necker cube is a really helpful exercise, helpful example. It's just a simple wireframe 2D drawing of a cube with no visual cues as to its orientation. So it can be interpreted to have either the lower left or the upper right square as its front side. We don't know exactly how it's starting, and we get to sort of interpret that for ourselves. In their 2015 landmark book, The Eureka Factor, another book I highly recommend you purchase, Quinos and Beeman describe how insights are reached through this sequence of events. This is a nice thing. I love when we find a kind of an indispensable pattern of some kind where we can kind of anchor ourselves to if we get lost. Immersion leads to impasse. You're stuck up to your neck in data. You know, I don't know what to do. It's analysis paralysis sets in. And this wisely often leads to diversion. Diversion is like go out and, watch a football game or something. Do something different. And in diversion, you can often find relief from that overwhelming feeling of paralysis. So, bird? But better still, a useful diversion can sometimes lead directly to insight. So, quick story. How many of you have seen WALL-E, the Disney movie? Oh, I love WALL-E. It's such a good movie. So the creator of WALL-E, here's a quick story from the book, The Eureka Factor. The creator was stuck on what WALL-E's head would look like. And it was really important that they got that part right. He's the protagonist and the hero. It had to be expressive. It had to be kind of sentient looking and sort of embody the human spirit somehow. But it also had to look like a machine. And he struggled for months. Then one chance afternoon at a baseball game, he was just asked by a colleague to go randomly to a baseball game. He borrowed some binoculars from someone next to him to get a closer look at something. And as he was doing this with the binoculars, he thought, oh, WALL-E would have binoculars for eyes. And that, I mean, that just is a really beautiful idea. You might argue that that happened in that moment, but there's also this little egg down here. This represents the unconscious sort of incubation, which is kind of always there in the background as you're bringing in new things as you're going along. A wide variety of these sort of this question really is outlined in this book I published last year, Conceptual Landscapes, Fundamentals in the Beginning Design Process. The book is really aimed at helping those of us who are working to better understand how we learn to design. And it's aimed especially at those of us who are just starting out in the field. But I think there's some nuggets for all of us interested in gaining a better awareness of our own approach. So insofar as the land itself is highly diverse and heterogeneous, so too is the body of possible methods and approaches in its genesis and creation, to its imagination, communication, production, and maintenance. I hope this book helps students dispel attitudes about there being a right or a wrong way of conceptualizing landscapes. The first 7 chapters explore the earliest sort of sparks of an idea. 6 more address challenges in mediating concepts in more advanced stages, and the final bit speculate about the exciting possibilities for us in the future ahead. Today I'm going to unpack the afterword for the book, which is the last little bit. And it's really, when I wrote it, it was really a reaction to the contributing author's work, everything that was presented in the book. But it's also kind of a reflection on my own experience as a teacher and a practitioner. So, how to frame a design concept in landscape architecture in 5 parts. You might be wondering how to put a good one together still. So in my experience, the really good ones have all 5 of these thingies. Well, what makes a good one? Again, who's to say? The whole process seems really subjective. There are some general patterns, a few general conditions, let's call them. Reading a site is my starting point. That's my bias. It's not for everybody, but I think that's important. And then I'm interested in an immersion into the culture of a place. This leads inevitably to a set of good design principles. From there, that enables a responsive organizational framework and ultimately helps me at least set up goals for the iterative formation of a design. And that's the goal at least, to have a chance to learn a little bit about a place, its people, get kind of, break bread, understand some of the problems and some of the, the overall sort of field of problems that exist, but also to recognize that every place is completely unique. And so as you go, I think this is a pretty useful outline to follow, and it doesn't really steer too far from what we learned from How to Train Your Dragon. By the way, there are way too many references for each of these here, but please see me if you'd like a reading list. All right, site, number 1. This is talking about place, territory, identity. In Hawaii, there's a really beautiful word, kuleana, which means simultaneously territory, privilege, and responsibility, which is kind of important. To define this, a site is a spatial location. It's ground that is occupied. It's a point of an occurrence or an event. But also as a verb, to cite something, to put something somewhere, is to fix or to build a particular thing. But sites are complex. In Hawaii, we have all these different, in Alaska, we could name snow 100 different ways. In the archipelago where I live, there's a lot of different terminology for this stuff. And it's the foundation, really, for all the bedrock that we stand on. The nice pretty one over here is pahoihoi. And then this one over here, which forms these little like spikes. If you've ever walked on Legos, you kind of go, and that's what they call that. It's important to learn different ways of reading a site, understanding its layers and all that. I tend to start with landform. That's how I was taught. In Hawaii, we can watch the land itself take shape and form new topography. It's pretty incredible. We can also witness by extension the formation of kipuka, which are remnant patches of vegetation whose topography preclude the flows of lava. In the same way that each island is a model of a continent, each kipuka evolves like an island with its own unique characteristics, structures, and habits. They're little oases, like little Edens. And the point really is to explore what's special about landform in your site. This happens to be something that affects me, but I would encourage you all to just look for what is like really important and unique about that. I was just left Oli's studio, and they're working on an Olmsted Brothers plan, and there's the real regionalist approach to that. Like, why is the Ramble in Central Park? Well, there's this beautiful boulder there. Why not just build the park around that? There's no other boulder like that anywhere in the world. At the same time, you got to learn to read water. And those of us in here who surf or fish or even probably snowboard or ski or whatever, there's context clues everywhere. Polynesian navigators, one of my, I would say, greatest teachers, can read water better than just about anybody, you might say. They learned from Arab navigators originally and have really produced sort of the vanguard of knowledge in this field. They can tell the relative distance to nearby islands just by the shape of wave swells around them. Some chiefs would lay down on the boat deck to get a sort of more attuned to that kind of fluctuation of where level is. They trace the angles of separate overlapping swells left as refracted wake shadows. This is a little excerpt from a great book called How to Read Water by Tristan Gooley, another one I highly recommend. He wrote also How to Read Nature, which is a nice supplement to that. These massive patterns in the ocean are the same as those left by this pebble in a tidal pool, which I find just so, just very enamored by that, when things seem to scale, The atmosphere has some liquid tendencies too. While subtle or even invisible to our perception, it comes alive as organisms swarm according to prevailing air patterns or toward resources like bugs and food and stuff, themselves swarming at an even smaller scale. While we measure, we might measure wind speed or water pressure or all this other scientific instrumentation, while nature plays along in thermal drifts unmitigated by human concerns. Stan Allen's famous diagrams of field conditions encourage the generation of abstract models to simplify complexity in order that we might gain some understanding about what we're trying to read. I also find that this is a useful thing to do as well. When you can simplify complexity to gain understanding, you're producing a model, and it's replicable as well. Some others can follow. It's helping us, understand what we're trying to read in a more like digestible way, and it's not oversimplified. It's just the right amount of simplification. This follows the road paved by ecologists like Foreman and Dromstadt, Joe Nassauer, Jack Ahern, to name just a few. And stepping way back, we're still talking about sight. The geometry at the human scale is somewhat predictable, yet even out at this view from the International Space Station, the Earth spins on an axis, yes. But as you can see from the blurry lines on the right-hand side image there's a wobble to it. It's errant, in other words. That means something in the system is shifting. There's a degree of unpredictability, a degree of play. And that means there's indeterminacy. So in other words, we don't know everything. We can't know everything. And I would argue that we're going to need each other's help to understand what's actually happening. We really need to slow down and try to be patient, listen to the earth and to each other to get a sense of how things are taking shape, no matter the scale. So exploring connections with the wind, with atmosphere and water, for example, we can look at the rich patterns created by fundamental planetary forces like its errant wobble or the Coriolis effect, and seen here, which produces this von Karman vortex. The left image from a temperature sheeting of a flame, or in the right, the same traces left by the wake shadows of a spider moving across a fluid modeling table. Oh, the spiders are coming out at the Canyon House, by the way. It's pretty cool. Yeah. So they all live. We're going to live together. And to a much larger scale, but nearly identical deposits and traces left of material as temperatures and currents and winds and other erosive and depositing forces take shape across regions. Dune variability closer to the human scale and a nice helpful visual matrix to organize them, enabling tangible inquiry based in reality. And these are just some thoughts about what I think about when I'm thinking about a site. Now part two, people, where do we begin? Well, here I'm referring to everybody, human beings, linked by common interest, kin, community, all of us. We all shape this world we live in. It's important to maybe go back to the reason why I have a slide like this in here. It was thanks to the sort of founding mothers and fathers of SELA when they invited Laurie Olin to come and he won the Lifetime Achievement Award back at the same conference Ben and I met at. He said, after all the years, what I've come to understand is that it's all about bringing people together. And I find that sentiment extremely profound and humbling. As I say that, and honestly, I still don't know really, I don't really understand people as well as I would say I understand things. People are just so fascinating, and scenes like this completely bewilder me. I know there's logics and rhythms and certain indispensable patterns that we trace as terrestrial organisms, but we're largely, I think really quite errant and unpredictable, which is why it's so important to listen and learn from every one of them, every chance you get. I just know no matter what you think about people, we're all here, so we better get along, right? Scenes like this are common where I live, unfortunately, but I don't see us in an environment like this as separate from the nature around us. We move like landforms and like water and like atmosphere, just a little bit quicker. And I see also this big extended family of brothers and sisters and kin with all other life. I think the trick is to learn the stories. Another one from Alan Watts. He says, we do not come into this world. That's a fallacy. We come out of it, as leaves from a tree, as the ocean waves, the universe peoples. I've never heard peoples used as a verb, but the universe peoples. He says every individual is the expression of the whole realm of nature, a unique action in the total universe. And so we're just playing different parts as finite changes in energy and surges and pauses gathered and distributed in space. Watts also said famously, the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. So that's what I recommend that you do. Everything that we make is for people. Now, if you've got a strong understanding of the site and you've made some friends and you get a little bit of a grip on the culture or the heritage of a place and the people who produced it, who came out of it, we can then, I think, get a few of these beauties together. Principles. A fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior, for a chain of reasoning. These are extremely handy. Principles help us stay on course. If something violates or otherwise doesn't support our principles, toss it. Their emphasis shapes our course ahead. And general elements in design. I put this up here for you, Carolyn. These are great, but they're not to be confused with principles. They are as descriptive as, they're not as descriptive, I think, as we need them to be to help us. These are better. This is the Biomimicry Guild's set of principles. And let's just look at a couple here. Like, this is a really useful tool. So how about adapt to changing conditions up top here? Well, how do we do that? This is a great principle, adapting to changing. Everybody's got to do that. Well, how should you do that? You can incorporate diversity. Good idea. You can maintain integrity through self-renewal or embody resilience through variation and decentralization. And it goes on. Whatever you're trying to do, I think this is a really useful metric for you. The Sustainable Sites Initiative also is another resource to get started if yours is an ecological approach. I'll talk more about these later. This leads to part 4 here, talking about framing. This is where we're getting into structure and rationalizing things, organizational strategies. This is a structure that encloses something. It could be a body, it could be a place, a scene, or a point. It could also, as a verb, when we're talking about the action or the operation of framing, we can create or formulate a plan, concept, or a system. That's helpful. With clear principles established, the process requires a rational framework at some point to help disparate elements integrate with and respond to a site and to its people, to one another, and to stage the ground for proposed actions and programs. So how does one gain the upper hand over this entanglement of materials, effects, and affect, as Jane Hutton describes it, that we inherit with each site and each project? In my studios, and I was just speaking with Brinley. Is Brinley here? Brinley's skipping the lecture. We were just talking about this little doohickey I call the design decision path. We'll use this as well as an information index in the next slide. And we diagram our design process, exploring every possible method available, and then selecting from that. It's sort of like doing triage. We've got someone bleeding out. We've got to just do one thing at a time, but there's 20 patients waiting in the waiting room. You can pick one from each of these columns. The two on the left deal with site, ecology, and culture. And then the rest of these are design. What are you going to design? You're going to design, all this stuff, and you're going to make it out of this, and this is how you form it. And then there's also the sort of the temporal aspect. So it's useful to kind of like just demonstrate that you're thinking about a lot of stuff, but that you've also, you know, managed to edit yourself as you're going. This is a recent one from a great student named Micah. You can see how he's working out what terms matter most in each column. This offers his own definition. These framing tools allow future change to responsively relate to constraints and agendas of a given scenario. More precision follows as he whittles down through the shape of his idea into a more carefully sculpted concept. This is an HOK tool called the Information Index, which I also highly recommend that you look at. There's an AIA white paper that HOK put out about 20 years ago or so, which really elucidates all this. He was also really creative with his principles. I always ask for 3. Sometimes I get 4 or 5, that's good too. 3 is all you need. Isn't that what Carl Steinitz taught us? 3 iterations. And his overall design approach, which I always have students diagram as well, is expressed as a figural diagram here, and we'll look at more literal frameworks in a moment. And at last, we arrive at framing. Sculpture, composition, dimension, resolution. Forming is all action. Okay, here, this is where we bring together the parts and combine stuff to create something. We make or we fashion, we give a shape to something, we mold. The last one here is really cool. These are all from the Oxford English Dictionary, by the way. The last one is to begin to exist, or to make something begin to exist. I find that to be really incredible. So let's explore how conceptualization took place on a few projects at a very sort of different set of scales and levels of complexity. Here I'm going to start with the simplest work and kind of work up from there. Here's a couple of my students, Katie and Anna, back in 2016. This is a lesson here. I would encourage you all to just say yes to stuff as you're getting started. Say yes to everything. I was really lucky to get to go work with folks like Walter Hood and Christian Fongfit and Henri Bava, and bring some kids from Ball State out to Sardinia to just kind of play in this incredible old silver mine. And one of the things we noticed when we got to the site was how windy it was. It was just, you got, in the Willow Valley, you get some pretty incredible wind too. But we wanted to try to diagram the wind. We were just there, it was really windy. But how do you show how windy it is? Well, Katie went up and grabbed some bougainvillea flowers and borrowed a hat from some cute old man and filled the hat with the flowers and climbed out to the end of this little pool here and then released them. And as those move across the little pool, they produce this wonderful, it's just a shape at first, but then it resolves. There's almost like an angle of repose sentiment to it here, where it's resting on the lip of the pool. And then over the course of a few more minutes, those petals, I guess they're actually leaves, right? The flowers are like the little white bit. But these started to kind of sprinkle themselves up into the site. And I just thought that was a really beautiful contrast, this like fuchsia flower in this very banal kind of concrete deck. And the contrast there was really powerful for us. It just really, it's like putting a highlighter onto the wind in some way. I thought that was kind of nice. Here's Anna very illegally stealing rebar out of an old wrecked building. We got in trouble for this, but we made some friends with the local police. The Carabinieri, I believe they're called. And so here we are ripping out these big long pieces of rebar and then jamming them into the beach on this kind of liminal zone between the water and the dry shore. You know, like where is the shoreline? Is it like, do you trace every pebble or do you generalize it? Well, we were trying to actually get a little bit general and producing this, like, I don't know, just a sculpture really. That I think arguably somewhat tastefully kind of plays with that wind and also plays with the shoreline and to some effect. We also dug all this back up and put it back when we were done, I promise. But it was very telling and very quick. This is maybe a few hours of actual exercise and practice outside with one another. And then it's really become, I think it was just really a dialogue with the water and the wind as a gesture. Okay, now, shifting scales. This is Main Street in a beautiful little place called La Prusia in Nicaragua. You have to imagine the smell of fried chicken and bumping Latin music. The site sits centered between Granada and Laguna de Apoyo to the west. Mombacho is this big, beautiful volcano to the south. Development pressure all along these rural roads that lead into all these cities, especially in this hemisphere, are facing sort of this rural migration that occurs. People come to the city, there's nowhere to be, so they end up sort of occupying and settling in informal systems on the outskirts of the towns. Because of the lake and the volcano and the amazing city, Granada's, by the way, one of the oldest settled cities in the Western Hemisphere, and it's incredible. There's going to be development pressure that continues to increase as this road here gets paved. Out here in the 70s, Jacques Cousteau was studying sweetwater sharks, and there's this very interesting sort of ecological history to this. So anyway, there's a lot of development pressure, and here's a little site sort of between those with what you would, I mean, for lack of a better word, there's sort of informal squatting happening along that road. Once that's paved, they're all going to be displaced. So this is really a housing project, but with every project, despite what program you're given or prescribed by a professor or by a client, there's really an opportunity to consider like how we divide up the land, how we live together. And the diagram on the right shows a single sort of family, typical detached configuration, private land with setbacks, fenced off and isolated. A lot of us grew up in places like that. The sketch on the left characterizes what might happen in shaping attitudes about that public realm. But we were a lot more interested in finding a way to cluster housing around the site to produce new opportunities for social exchange and interaction, as well as to hopefully develop a sense of community. This tamarind tree offers the insight that I needed, and our team were really delighted when we discovered what this was. And if you're in my studio, keep your hand down. But does anybody who's not in Carolyn in my studio know what that ring might be from? Any guesses? Yes?
I think it's like in mycology where
Ooh, a fairy circle? Yeah, that's a great, no one's ever guessed that before. I love that. Wrong. But it's a really good guess. That's a great, aren't those amazing? We get those all over in Manoa where I live. Anybody seen a fairy circle? Those are great. Yes, sir?
Is that where the roots end for the tree?
Hey, that's not a bad guess either. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, that is the critical root zone of the tree. But the roots don't make that line. What made that line? What did that?
Drip line.
The drip line. Thank you, Professor. Good. That's a lot of dripping. You're wrong as well. Well, it's actually Hugo here collecting tamarinds, walking around the tree with the tamarinds. But it's a diagram, nevertheless. All these answers are somewhat accurate. Yeah, take them together. You know, it's a path made by collecting tamarinds, but it's also the tree's drip edge, it's the tree's critical root zone, and it's a hell of an insight when you're trying to form a concept, especially in another country. So we mapped all the existing trees on the site, and we created a framework that threaded the housing clusters into the landscape, producing a flexible lattice of spaces of varying uses that could evolve over time. You see how the trees kind of are there, and then we adopt this kind of abacus system where you can slide the development in and out. The road and all the other infrastructure follows that system. So trees have primacy. The trees begin to, I think, offer us the way into this as a solution. The housing clusters can become small enterprises for production and for sharing. There can be sort of, you know, imagine these kind of, this is like the three-legged stool of what we were envisioning here, commerce, production, community space. And you can jam a lot of stuff in there once you've got the right kind of framework. Within the existing tree canopy at the center of the community space, essentially everybody owns that canopy and the critical environment below. Oh no, I hope I didn't offend. As we envisioned an overlapping series of possible relationships between people along that main street, front yards extend both the domestic and the small-scale commercial functions of the dwellings. And by small-scale, I'm talking about cottage industries like chocolate-covered frozen bananas or something like that. But that's enough. You know, sometimes you can actually see a lot of upward mobility just through like an ownership of a goat or something like that. So very simple microeconomies. There's a process in place for users and uses to change over time as needs change. Here's some more examples. What I'm talking about here, principles, recommendations, being just clear about what you're going to do, writing it down, using plain language to communicate. And here's a couple of my old drawings showing how the road would sort of weave through the existing trees, how the housing would then start to kind of branch off from that. Another sort of shot of that. This is sort of the earlier iterations. As you go, they get better and better and better. But here, similarly, sort of finding everything in orange is like no cut, no fill. Leave that alone. And there's a sort of an articulated or abstracted edge boundary that provides a kind of a geometry for us to lay everything else out on. And that got built. We did some of this work, put some houses. There's a slightly younger version of me right there with Ugo. And the houses were, I think, pretty interesting. But more than that, it was this kind of putting together of different relationships as that went on. Here on the right, you see 3 kids planting a starfruit tree. And I don't know if you can see, but they're wearing little stickers. They had little yellow smiley faces, and the orange team had orange smiley faces. We were working with an international development partner through this project, and she insisted that we don't just go and plant the trees. She said, no, select students from the school, they'll plant the trees, and then they'll have to maintain those trees. Because if you just go down and plant them, they'll be gone tomorrow. So those kids own that tree, and I believe it's still there. Totally different scale. Let's go down under and look at a whole big old thingy. Here we are at E-Gate, Eastern Gate of the Central Business District of Melbourne, Australia. Really beautiful place. This is an old piggyback rail yard, if you can't kind of tell. There was 11 tenants on here. It's about 11 hectares, which is 22, 23 acres or so. Pretty big. It's a brownfield site. It's a super fun site. And the city wants to know what to do. This is a Costco right here. You get the Ferris wheel and all the bells and whistles of like a new city in the making. So here we are with our sort of, let's say, the aerial oblique kind of vision for the thing. But you really got to figure out like what's the carrying capacity. So this framework grows slightly differently. It's an urban scale project. There's a lot more complexity. But you can do density summaries for comparable neighborhoods. You can look at different parts of Melbourne. Or look at different parts of the world, like Barcelona, where there are like walkable streets and boulevards and the kind of vibe that you're going for. You can just basically look for precedents that have all the bits and pieces that you want in your project. And this is a series of benchmarks to try to optimize that set of density assumptions that we were making. At EDAW, and then it turned into AECOM, there was a tool that we used on big complex urban projects called Space Pool. Now Space Pool, this is a spreadsheet, I know it's kind of boring, but if you look a little closely, you'll see Melbourne, Damascus, Amsterdam, Barcelona, Masdar. I don't know if anybody knows Masdar, but that was another project we were working on at the time. See, what we're doing here is we're actually taking a big chunk of these places and just slapping them into our site. It's not that clever. It's actually quite dumb. But you can figure out how many people would fit there if you did so. And the client wants 6,000 residential units. Well, if you jammed a chunk of Amsterdam in the cultural center, you know, with a primary open space and a secondary open space, that's what the blue and the yellow indicate, you can only fit 860 people. So that kind of debunks that like really radical and aggressive real estate priority. This is not an economic project, this is a landscape project. So we need to build in some sense of what's there. If you look above, you can see what we were doing is just going in and we used CAD and we just traced areas and looked for area calculations, figuring out how much of these chunks of these cities was open space, how much of it is primary open space, secondary, and connective open space. And the connective open space is all of the tributaries. It's all the sidewalks and roads and parking lots and all of that connective fabric. That's always a big, big component. Also, usefully, in blue here, the percent of pedestrian space to total open space. Now this is a really useful number to know. So if you know, basically what you can fit there, you can start modeling it. And you can make dumb models to start. I saw Todd, I don't know if that was Todd or who was that, talking about dumb, was that Jake? Talking about dumb models earlier?
Only dumb stuff.
Only dumb stuff? Yeah, I read a bunch of stuff down when you were talking. This is a great way to start, because you could say, boy, oh boy, 6,000 units is gonna be pretty dumb. And you can also change, you can shake it up, change your typology. Here's a perimeter block scenario, still pretty dumb. You can get a little smarter as you go, and as you iterate, you get closer and closer to better ideas. Here we were thinking about a concept that was driven by the context. So you see in the diagram on the left there, on the top, it's really about pedestrian movement around the site. So the context is already there for us, and we can use what's there. We can read essentially how those connections might work. You could also think of it like a medical analogy. Maybe it's like a wound, and you're crisscrossing almost like a suture would to heal a wound and bring people back into the site. As that goes, you can see how that first diagram, that set of red lines, those indicate view lines across the site. Those intersect. And where they do, we envisioned a lattice of community spaces, which you'll see in the master plan shortly. Then all the built forms are secondary or tertiary to the public realm. So the first thing, like in the last project that was the trees, the first thing here is the pedestrian circulation on the site, how people are going to move around. Focusing concept iterations on permeable networks that connect the neighborhoods and bring people and nature kind of directly into conversation with each other. Or here, this was on a 5-foot roll of yellow trace paper. These are collaborative sketches with the whole team. And just, you know, working through all these notions of bringing pedestrian movement into the site. Essentially, the landscape is the primary feature, and the site is driven by that pedestrian experience in touch with nature. So we have sort of 2 watersheds in the site. You see sort of this handsome bridge up here. This is North Melbourne Station. As you come down, this is sort of the high point of the site, and then water moves this way, and it also moves this way toward Moonee Pond Creek, this ecological corridor over here. And you can see there's a cricket pitch, which is 175 meters long by 150 meters wide for a sense of scale. I don't have a scale bar on North Arrow on here, sorry. So water is the heart of this project. From the high point to the low point, water moves through the public realm and brings nature directly into the core of these community spaces. Just nice examples from around the world of how you can treat water as it's starting, just in a trickle through little runnels, very classic European kind of avenue. In Portland, this kind of green infrastructure, best management practices, Victoria Park. You can make steam happen in the wintertime, or you can just let water do its thing, creating a pronounced decrease in temperature, creating a habitat for critters, all sorts of stuff. How that diagrams out looks like a little bit like this, where we can sort of see that topography kind of draining in these 2 halves, more urban, much more, let's say like medium density, and then residential, and then out to the edge. On top of that, there's a canopy strategy, large avenue trees, mid-sized trees, smaller trees, laneways, and then sort of like a grassland palette. As well, we capitalized on everything we could. This is a rooftop strategy. So the roofs aren't just going to be blank. You can replace the footprint of the building with the landscape. You can put stuff up there if you build the buildings correctly. And so at the lower buildings on the left, you see those are like lanais and barbecues and stuff. As you get higher and higher, you can get into intensive horticulture. And the tallest buildings, we reserve those for solar energy production. A couple quick sections here, just to kind of look through the site a little bit. You can kind of see what's happening. What's really nice about this is the whole altered terrain that's present here becomes the pedestrian realm. And then we tuck all the other stuff, the service infrastructure. There's actually a bunch of other retail and stuff like that's tucked underneath. So there is vehicular access, but it's not really perceived when you're walking through the site. It's just a nice pedestrian environment. Just a couple of shots. Pre-rendering software shots here. This is a, yeah. It's a whole Photoshop, baby. And it's a nice example of what one of those community spaces feels like. Or here we are at kind of that heart of the site at the high point, and then what that might feel like in the rain. And so last, I'll conclude with a new project at Keikahakai State Park on the island of Hawaii. Here we are on the Kona side of the Big Island. And we published this technical report with the Hawaii DLNR after working on the project for about 2 years. Unlike other projects, this one's the result of a grant, and the scope was a proof of concept design strategy that leads to RFPs for local firms. Quick overview, increasing tourism pressure. Is there a viable alternative model to just building casinos and resorts everywhere? And then the kind of public and public partnership sort of handshake between the state legislature and the Department of Land and Natural Resources for the state and the University of Hawaii. And then what we're doing here to kind of frame the project here is to adopt a kind of ecotourism program, but also to relate to the site and be site dependent. I won't spend too much time on this stuff here, but to say a quick thing here that people like to come to Hawaii. Tourism makes up roughly a third of the entire economy of the state. And Waikiki and Oahu is obviously the largest draw, but the island of Hawaii is actually growing faster as a tourist destination. So there's good reason for that. It's pretty amazing. Kilauea is popping off right now. If anybody can get in a helicopter and go look at it. In fact, arrivals to the main airports on both sides of the Big Island have increased steadily. And so this is good evidence to support our path forward here. Now, a lot of the development, comes with economic pressure. These are the sorts of recreation and leisure enclaves that we're really familiar with. They function as, enclaves of extraction because they primarily draw resources out of the place rather than contributing to anything but waste and energy demand. And we don't have a lot of time to go into the environmental impact that these resorts have on otherwise pristine coastal habitats. But this slide is up to just show you the sort of status quo. This is just a Google image screen grab for the new Atlantis that's being built on Oahu's west side. Boo. So this is what everybody wants, or at least they think this is what they want when they book their trip. But this is more likely the reality of what you're going to experience in Waikiki, for example. The International Ecotourism Society produced this in 2019. This is a really beautiful list of principles of ecotourism: minimizing physical, social, behavioral, psychological impacts, building environmental, cultural awareness, blah, blah, blah. Good stuff, Pono stuff. Like the way that you treat a national park when you go to the national park. You don't litter, There's just rules to it, and those are important. And in some ways, this is really the battleground for the future of tourism in Hawaii. Places like this. This is Keikahakai, which means the way along, the kai is the water. This slide gives you a kind of a quick impression of the site. There's the oldest wooden structure in all the islands. It's Redwood House here, dating back to 1880, when the site was primarily accessible only by canoe. It's also covered in ancient archaeological sites, petroglyphs. There's a large kiave grove and a coconut grove that emerged due to this small seepage of fresh water at the coastline and a pristine coral reef. It's in a really beautiful white sand beach. Kind of looks like this. It's in the flight path of the Kona Airport, which is just over here. Incredible site. And so what we were doing here is we were asked really to come in, give an analysis, and we did just that. And we analyzed the heck out of this thing. So looking at that, here's the context here again to the airport. There's this really crazy, bumpy, crappy road that goes through the lava fields and gets down here to the bay. The capacity at current is not sufficient. People come down here and camp illegally, and there's just a lot of detritus and litter and a lot of stuff that happens, a lot of impact from even passive activities like camping. And so there's a real desire to kind of figure out how much stuff you can jam, a lot like the E-Gate project. How much stuff can you jam in there without messing it up forever? That becomes the problem. And so we were trying to benchmark certain numbers that we would allow to enter. It seems like that at Brighton. I was just trying to get a lift ticket, but you can only ski at Brighton if you get a parking ticket. you have to get a parking space to get a lift ticket, right? So it's like the parking is becoming a kind of I think, let's say, a tool for regulating impact, which is interesting. Here again, more analysis, just more visualization of the stuff that's there, and there's a lot to see. Documenting the built structures that are existing there, as well as let's say some of the key zones of the site. So the access zone, which is this really crazy bumpy road, the lava field itself, all these interesting little remnants of rock walls that were there, all dry laid, kind of ancient masonry. And then there's beautiful groves of trees. The kiave is a particularly beautiful one. So we looked at just about everything we could look at on the site. We documented it all, even the color composition. And then we established a framework based a lot on the archaeologists that we were working with at the DLNR. Really beautiful sense here of the bathymetry as it leads up to the beach line, and then how kind of interesting and cool the sort of is in these lava fields, really fluctuating topographically. There's a current coastline profile here that we drew up primarily because there's this incredible tidal fluctuation that occurs between 6 and 10 feet just on a given day. And then with sea level rise, and you can believe what you want about climate change, but I don't think that necessarily has anything to do with sea level rise. Sea level rise is just happening. So there's a trend there, and trends have a funny way of continuing. So we're seeing this is the 100-year sea level rise projection, when basically all that crap that's there is going to be at least underwater when there's king tide, and definitely in big trouble when we've got a storm coming through. We used this drawing. This was a CAD file the archaeologists gave us, and they measured and drew every single twig and rock and stump. They camped out there for a couple of years and drew this little bad boy. So we brought that in, asked them questions like, what are your preservation priorities? What do you want to make sure that maintains itself in perpetuity? And we asked, like, how can we balance the historic and ecological layers while maintaining this emphasis on preservation and still simultaneously creating like an accessible public resource? So these are tough questions. This drawing primarily illustrates the sectional and material relationships to the site, pertinent to that sea level rise that we just talked about, but also in relation to those lava flows and the different types of materials that are around the beach. Most of the team members on the client side were archaeologists, as I just mentioned, which leads to some really interesting conversations around preservation, raises also a lot of questions about ecotourism. And again, how do you balance protection and preservation of these artifacts and these like special places with increasing development and recreation pressure as a public resource? So finding ways to consider things like views and trajectories between key points of the site was important. And then there's also this like predominant circulation patterns. The sort of like more developed side up on the top, and the more sort of informal. This trail kind of transitions to Makalavena Park, which is a much more famous beach park just down the road. And as tourism pressure increases on the site, structuring circulation becomes increasingly more and more important. That circulation helps us delineate key zones of activity, each having a unique set of sort of identifiable characteristics. And that allows us to consider relationships and connections between the different areas, but also to kind of establish a sense of place for each. So they have a sort of an identity. There's 9 distinct zones on the site that we found. Coconut Grove, there's these platforms that were there, historic structures, these transitional pathways, and so on and so forth. As we start to combine all those layers of analysis, it gets a little hairy. It's like there's almost too much to look at there. So you have to delaminate that and find correlations, find interesting facets. Like maybe the canopy is aligned with some of the access to water. Maybe this like circulation pattern has something to do with where the spaces are going to work out. So you can reshuffle those layers in different strategic ways and look for correlations and causality. Again, just some more images of the site. We really just tried to document this place and just argue to just not mess it up. Don't do too much. Some programming exercises. I showed you Micah's version of this from a different studio. I ran this as a studio with some different teams, and you see how they're approaching this idea again too. Here's the site, its culture, its ecology, and then each team is really asked to focus on one at a time. Just kind of develop your concept around like 1 or 2 terms from this. And as you kind of connect those, history, parking, Chiave groves, lava, preserving, integrate, you start to get a little bit more focus, and you don't have to necessarily think about every single thing. You can just show your client that you thought about a lot of stuff, but that you edited it well. Here's a really fun exercise you should always do when you're programming, thinking about things in terms of spatial scale and how much like legibility those provide you. You can also sort of visualize that differently in terms of graphs, and then start to sort of develop different you can really develop and then evaluate programming scenarios in these kind of existing areas. This really helps establish priorities and create decision-making processes. There are existing groups in the local community as well that are already active in other parks around that are looking for more ways to be involved. So we started to just make kind of like a brochure for some of these more sort of cultural activities here of like traditional practices that included dry stack masonry. All of that can help really build the site as well. It doesn't have to be a top-down master plan. These things can happen incrementally over time. And as that's happening, you can learn how to build dry lay masonry. So those I don't think those are antithetical at all to the preservation goals. I think, in fact, those are deeply connected educationally and in terms of preservation. Other issues are fishing. Great example of a program that's got long and deep roots in the site, as well as local community of active practitioners. As that starts to take shape, sort of some other like prettier views of that, you sort of see the whole layout here, the big Chiave Grove. We're going to put some camping sites in here of different scales. This is a coconut grove, and we built this kind of boardwalk that would wrap around the site. Now that boardwalk navigates through pretty tricky terrain, and it makes the site accessible. However, there are some spots, and this is kind of top secret, but there are places where those boardwalks will actually cover stuff that we don't want anybody to damage. Petroglyphs and things like burial sites, Ivi Kupuna, so places where ancestors are buried. Those are sites worthy of protection, and so sometimes the boardwalk is there to frame something, and sometimes it's there to cover it. Site circulation, again, I mentioned this before, it was one of the key issues delineated by the client, and it identified as sort of a point of focus for us that helped mitigate some other impacts of increasing tourism. There's increasing numbers of like Instagram tourists and stuff like that. So we're trying to accommodate, different user groups and accomplish other goals for them. The beach user, the explorer, the local, etc. And you can take sort of one at a time, and just you have to speculate. There's a degree of conjecture to what we do. You have to sort of imagine what it's like to be a tourist, and where would they go, and how does that work? And as that kind of wiggly path starts to kind of move around the site, you see how it begins to define certain characteristics and certain issues on the site. Again, another typical user. And then these are just sort of visualizations that sort of talk a little bit about circulation options. And we did this all through a hardness gradient. So from sort of soft or light touch, low investment, minimal impact, to much more heavy duty stuff, more like the DLNR typically builds, like ADA compliant, stone and heavy materials. Other examples here from around the site. And so a lot of the pre-existing condition looks kind of like what you see on the left, and people are just kind of walking through here. You can mulch some of the Chiave. There's a bunch of brush. You can just mulch it and lay that mulch down. That's a really good, really cheap way to solve that problem. Or you can build up something a little bit more sturdy and robust. Again, I promised we'd talk about camping a little bit. So another important element to the design brief was the need for formalized camping areas that were safe and that were secure and that didn't unnecessarily impact the rest of the site. The DLNR has had a lot of success with a sort of an unimproved camping area to the north. So they were just super instructive. It just helps a lot to have great clients. So they really helped us develop and visualize specifications in terms of not only the numbers and the carrying capacity for camping, but like what the physical makeup of those sites was going to need to be. So you can look at like small little tiny campsites where you've just got a couple people, and you can also build that up in terms of scale, because you might have like the local family comes down with like 2 or 3 Hummers and a couple pickup trucks, and they bring out all the there's like a big hole, and we can roast a pig, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes from that down to just like a solo camper, and so we tried to accommodate multiple different groups in this report. And what this ends up looking like as far as the existing structures is a real light touch proposition where you might be able to preserve some of the architecture. You might be able to do some things like interpretive education. Maybe you can rent a snorkel. You can get into sort of outdoor classroom ideas. And then for some of these other sites, just to sort of visualize what that looks like, it's a pretty soft type of development. It's not permanent, and maybe this is a Haleva'a, the canoe house over there. That might be the kind of thing that a cultural practitioner could come in and develop in concert with tourist groups. And they could learn about the place and learn why it's so special. More of that follows in these other locations. This was just called the Donkey Pen, this little area here. And so you can rebuild some of that. You can put in some cultural educational facility. Again, the goal was to not do this. It was to avoid that. It was to find a kind of a Goldilocks zone of balance between development pressure and this incredible site that you don't want to mess up. And that's a real challenge. So to conclude, let's relax here for just a moment. Regardless of the context, a strong concept grows from a site and its people. They are how we get our principles together and how we begin to frame a problem field. I hope this talk demonstrated how it's important to have all that before you make the shift into form. We all know that landscapes flow and change and decay and adapt. They're based on temporal processes and laws of indeterminacy. And our concepts and our readings of sites and cultures should adapt and respond accordingly. Ours is a social and cultural practice. And our concepts arguably are best when they emerge from the cultural and heritage of a place, promoting positive impacts from human activity, socialization, exchange, and collaboration. Concepts seem formidable at first, big and scary like a dragon, but over time, if we adopt a rational process that leads to good decision making, we make some friends along the way, I think we have a real shot of making lasting work that means something. Thank you.
Thank Thank you so much, Simon. That was wonderful. I just wanted to open it up to a quick Q&A if we have a question or two from the audience before we move to the Common Studio. Evelyn.
Okay, I'm curious if you have any comments or advice for...
I hate giving advice.
Just comments then. Like, how have you navigated all of these different cultures? Like, these are very different places that you've been, and so...
Be polite.
I think we can do that.
At Mauna Kea, if you go to Mauna Kea, you're supposed to let the auntie know, you're supposed to let Pele know that you're coming up the hill. Just be respectful. Be kind. I don't know. Yeah.
That's good advice.
I grew up real poor, and I always had I always wanted to go water skiing or something. So I was always just trying to make friends, So make friends with the rich kids with the lake house, It's kind of like that. I think it's a lot like that. It's like just I don't know. And I also just said yes to lots of stuff, and then I've probably disappointed a lot of people because I don't always follow through. I'm working on that. Navigating different cultures, I think, is kind of easy as long as you're willing to eat the food, and even if it's a weird thing. We can talk more about weird food offline. I don't know. It's a tough one. I've just been lucky, I guess. I have been in environments where I was part of a team, I guess. I work at this university. You guys are students at this great institution. So when you go meet people, the first thing that they get to learn about you is that you're part of this big thing that's trusted. I think that's part of it, maybe. 'Cause you're not just solo. You're not just out there dangling on a string. You're part of a collective, and this comes with a lot of cachet. There's just a lot that goes along with saying, "Hi, I'm a USU master's student. Nice to meet you." They already know the program. They know the reputation of that. So I think that's probably part of it. Being associated with cool things, I think, has been really, really important. But we can talk more about it. That's a great question. I don't know. I'm just really lucky, I would say. That would be the best answer I can give you. Prepare yourself, though. I mean, you can also you can be lucky, but then I think luck happens when you're prepared. I think that's a thing. I think I heard that. I don't know. I'm probably butchering that, but the more prepared you are, the more ready you are, the better the likelihood that you're able to be receptive to new weird stuff. I guess, I don't know, I've got a good mom, and she was really good at being everybody's gonna be different, and there's gonna be some weird smells, but just kind of go with the flow. I think that's probably part of it too, to be honest. Just finding the virtues in others. You can see the whole universe in a person's eyes if so there's that. And you always learn something from somebody, no matter who they are. So there's that. Yeah, just be humble and try to smile, and I don't know, eat the food.
That's cool, thanks.
Yeah, for sure.